Hello and welcome to Real Fear Files. Today, we're diving into 9 chilling true encounters from those who walk the hidden paths of America's most breathtaking wilderness, Yellowstone National Park. Beneath the steaming geysers, roaming wildlife, and the countless tourists who pass through each year, there exists a shadowy reality that few ever glimpse. These stories come from the rangers who patrol the park's most isolated trails, respond to emergencies that never reach the headlines, and have seen things that defy explanation. These are not ghost stories to thrill visitors. They are real accounts, drawn from official reports, personal testimonies, and decades of quiet warnings shared among those who truly know the park. To safeguard the people involved, names and certain details have been changed, but every account remains faithful to the events as reported. If you're new here, hit subscribe to Real Fear Files for daily true horror stories from the darkest corners of reality. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a terrifying tale. And if you've experienced something strange or unsettling in the wilderness, share your story in the comments. We want to hear from you. Story 1. Derek never got why the park stuck him with solo night patrols in the Upper Geyser Basin. After 6 brutal seasons at Yellowstone, he'd stopped asking questions that didn't matter. Nighttime was when the tourists vanished, when the park dropped the mask and showed its real face. The crowds, the camera flashes, the tour buses, all of it melted away, leaving only steam, shadow, and the deep, constant rumble of water boiling somewhere beneath the crust. On clear nights, the stars spilled over the boardwalks like frozen waves. But foggy nights? That's when the basin turned into something else entirely. Late September now, that weird shoulder season where the air can't make up its mind between fall and early winter. Wind cut sharp enough to bite exposed skin. Steam climbed from the geysers and pools like it was alive, twisting and curling around Derek as he stepped onto the planks. Tonight the fog was thick. He hadn't seen it this heavy in years. It crept around his boots, slinking across the boards, swallowing railings a few steps ahead, making the path vanish into a wall of white. Derek slowed his pace, the way he always did past midnight. Rushing out here was a quick way to disappear. On either side of the planks, the ground was treacherous, a thin, fragile crust over scalding, acidic water, the kind that could dissolve a human body before sunrise. He'd sat through enough safety lectures to know the score. One slip, one weak railing, one misstep, and there'd be nothing left to pull from the mud and steam. The earth didn't forgive mistakes. His radio hissed softly on his shoulder as he glanced at the time. 1:17 a.m. Shift didn't end until Foreigner. He'd already run the perimeter near the visitor center, checked the service road gate. Now it was the geyser loops. Just him, the flashlight, and the low, wet hiss of steam seeping out of the crust. Most nights were boring. A loose trash lid, a stray bottle, a board that needed tightening tomorrow. Routine stuff. But tonight, from the second he stepped onto the basin loop, he felt it. Eyes on him. Not unusual in the park, especially at night, when elk would shine from the tree line. Coyotes would tail him just outside the beam of his light, but this felt different. Personal. Like tension pressed against the back of his neck. He told himself it was the fog, the way it bent sound and made every creak closer than it was. Still, he gripped his flashlight tighter and kept moving toward the smaller pools tourists usually skipped, ignoring the famous eruptions. He stopped at the first junction, shining the beam into the rolling steam. A few feet out, it vanished, devoured by white. The world shrank to a wet circle around his boots, pale railings suggesting the path, but beyond that, nothing. "You're fine," he muttered under his breath. Same loop, different night. The first time it happened, he barely noticed. Now, as he walked, the radio burst with static, a low, broken voice cutting through. He paused, tilted his head, expecting another ranger checking in. Nothing. Channel looked normal. He pushed the transmit button. Derek on Upper Geyser Loop. Anyone copy? Silence. Then the usual voice from the station cut through, steady and clear, asking for his location. He chalked the earlier noise up to interference and moved on. By the time he hit mid-loop, the fog had thickened. It rolled in slow waves, glowing faintly where the pools caught starlight or distant lodge lights. His boots knocked a steady rhythm on wet boards. A geyser hissed to his left, then exhaled with a wet, gasping sound like a sigh. Derek tried to run through the checklist in his head. Railings intact, signage visible, no one on the paths. Halfway through, the radio crackled again. A whisper buried under static, just enough to make his chest tighten. "Say again?" he muttered, adjusting volume. This time, he didn't doubt it. Amid the hiss, he heard it. His name. Derek. Soft, distant, wrong, flat. Every syllable weighed the same, like someone who'd never spoken English before was trying to pronounce it. It hit him the same way mispronounced native place names did. Careful, awkward, wrong. He froze. Fog brushed his knees, swirling like smoke. Slowly, he spun in a circle, flashlight slicing through white tunnels. No shapes, no movement. Just steam, curling and restless. He keyed the radio, forcing calm into his voice. "Unit 2, you on channel? Did you call me?" Confusion answered him. No. Nothing back at the station. Maybe bleed over from another frequency. Could happen in storms. Derek clipped the radio back on and told himself he was just tired. Season's almost over, night shifts stacking up, brain filling in blanks. He moved on, hugging the center of the boardwalk. The wide pool came into view, water a weird turquoise in low light, glassy but lethal. Steam curled up in thin tendrils, blurring the edge where earth became water. His eyes caught the warning sign nailed to the railing. Stay on boardwalk, ground fragile, scalding water. A cartoonish figure had a leg breaking through crust, red dissolving into the pool. He'd seen the real pictures during training. Worse. He wished he hadn't. Derek picked up his pace slightly, eager to clear the stretch. On the far side of the pool, the fog thinned for a moment, giving a glimpse of the path dipping, rising toward a cluster of low geysers. That's when he saw it. Someone standing in the middle of the steam field, about 30 yards off the boardwalk. First thought, visitor who slipped past the gate. But the stance was off. Arms dangling wrong, not straight, not bent. Too still. Even from this distance, the figure faced him. But the face? Nothing. Just a darker void in the fog. Derek's throat went dry. Instinct snapped in. He raised the flashlight, slammed it to full, and shone it at the figure. Light hit the fog, scattering, and for a second, the shape solidified. Standing on ground barely stable for a rabbit, let alone a person. Silhouette wrong, shoulders narrow, neck too long, like a child's sketch nearly right. Then, just like that, it was gone. "Hey," he called, voice small against the basin's murmur. "You can't be out there. Move toward my light. Stay calm. Move slow." Nothing. No reply. Cold seeped from his skull down into his gut. Training drilled it into him. Never leave the planks. 2 victims? Not worth it. If someone wandered off into the field, protocol said backtrack, call it in, wait for daylight and back up. He reached for his radio. Before he could press the button, the voice returned, clearer, closer, like it was right there even if he turned off the radio. "Derek!" The hair on his arms shot up. It wasn't exactly his voice, but the pitch, the rhythm, familiar enough to freak him out. Someone had been listening, mimicking. He stared into the fog, forcing himself to run the checklist. Document, stay on solid ground, call it in. Unit 2, Upper Geyser Basin, possible unauthorized person. 30 yards east of Mid-Loop Pool. Need another set of eyes. Pause. Roads icy. 20 minutes minimum for backup. They asked if he had a visual. He looked. Fog churned. No figure. Nothing but white. "Negative," he said. Staying on the boardwalk. The basin was quiet now. Too quiet. Even the hissing vents sounded muted, like the world turned down the volume. Derek's own breathing screamed in his ears as he stepped forward again. Slow. Alert. Derek passed the next small geyser, steam curling like restless fingers. Then the fog parted for a sliver, a narrow window onto the field. And there it was again. Closer now, still on the wrong side of the safe line, facing him. The posture had shifted slightly, head tilted like it was studying him, waiting. This time, the figure didn't raise a flashlight, didn't need details. Derek forced his voice steady, clipped. The ranger cadence drilled into him for panicked hikers. "Sir, or ma'am, if you can hear me, move back to the boardwalk. Walk toward my voice. Step carefully. Don't run." Nothing moved. No reply. The fog fell back like a curtain. When it shifted again, the space was empty. Backup showed up eventually, long after Derek had circled the loop twice. Wet footprints left his path across the boards. They tore through the fog, sweeping the area until dawn. No prints on the fragile ground, no broken crust, no thermal readings beyond the usual vents. Later, the cameras? Nothing. Derek filed his report, stiff and clinical. One line added at the bottom. Unidentified vocal interference on radio. He didn't write about the voice saying his name again. A single, almost satisfied murmur as he walked back to the station. He tried to shake it. Rangers see weird stuff all the time. Lights flickering in steam, optical illusions, elk frozen in unnatural poses. The mind fills blanks, whispers itself into terror. For a week, he almost bought it. Almost told himself it was just tricks of the night. Then the station supervisor called him aside one evening before a shift. A pile of old reports in hand. The archives had been digitized, and someone noticed a pattern tied to Derek's sector. "Thought you'd want to see this," the supervisor said, sliding the worn papers toward him. The first report was over 10 years old, written by a ranger who died in a car crash years ago. Neat, precise handwriting. The description wasn't vague. Figure observed off boardwalk in heavy steam. Distance, 30 yards. Vocalization through radio channel using ranger's first name. No physical evidence. No thermal anomaly. Derek flipped the next one. 7 years later, different ranger. Same loop. Same distance estimate. Same detail. Used my first name through radio, not originating from station. There were 4 in total, each years apart. Each described the same thing with minor variations. Thick fog. Figure where none should be. Voice on the radio using a name it shouldn't know. The last report? 2 seasons ago, filed by the ranger Derek had replaced. In tiny script beside the official notes. Sounds like whoever it is practicing. First time, barely got the name right. Last night before I left, it sounded almost exactly like me. Season after season, whenever fog swallowed the boardwalk, Derek kept his rounds. That was his job. But he kept the radio low, didn't answer whispers in the static, spoke only to living rangers. When his shift ended, he hustled back, sticking to the center of the planks, eyes fixed on the boards beneath his boots. Never looked out into the steam, never looked at the empty spaces where something patient, something that learned slowly, might be waiting to see who came back. Every patrol after that, the memory clung. The figure in the fog, the voice on the radio, the way it learned the cadence, the rhythm, until it nearly sounded human. Derek's hands stayed tighter on his flashlight, his steps quieter, deliberate, watching the planks and nothing else. Other rangers shared stories, strange lights, shadows that didn't match animals, sounds that came from nowhere. Derek didn't mention the voice mimicking him, the way it knew his name. Not to anyone. Every night the fog rolled in, thick, suffocating, turning the basin into a white void. The geysers hissed, the vents whispered, the pools gleamed turquoise and lethal. Derek moved through it all, logging the small things, the ordinary. Unsecured trash lids, loose boards, empty bottles. The work was familiar, the fear was not. Sometimes, when the wind was right, when steam twisted like fingers through the railings, he'd hear it again. A faint whisper. His name, just like him. But not him. Not quite. A shadowy echo learning, practicing, waiting. The boardwalks were slick under his boots. The hot, acidic water hissed beneath a fragile crust. Every step, a gamble. He remembered the training. One slip and you were gone. And now, something else had learned the sound of him walking, the rhythm of his voice. Years of patrols, nights alone, and the basin remained unpredictable. Beautiful, yes. Deadly? Absolutely. Derek kept moving, kept documenting, kept breathing through the thick, rolling fog. But he never answered the voice, never moved off the boards. And every time he passed a pool, every time the steam curled in that unnatural turquoise light, he felt it, watching, listening, learning. Somewhere in the basin, something waited, something patient, something that had practiced for years, learning names, cadences, and footsteps. Derek knew it wouldn't stop. But he also knew he had rules, protocols, lines he could not cross. Survival wasn't about confronting it. It was about walking the boards, keeping to the path, and never, ever looking into the white. And when the shift ended, he moved fast, staying centered on the planks, flashlight steady, eyes down, heart racing, knowing the basin had claimed more than a few who ignored its warnings. The fog swallowed everything beyond the wood, and Derek kept to himself, a silent witness to something that might be alive long after the park went quiet. Because whatever it was, whatever had learned the sound of his voice and the pattern of his steps, it waited for the next one. And maybe, one night, it would be ready to speak clearly. Harper had always figured Shoshone Lake was Yellowstone's hidden corner, the one most folks never stumbled on. No packed overlooks, no railings, no souvenir stands hawking its name. To get there, you either had to paddle for hours or hike your ass off. Most tourists wanted geysers, bison, the classic roadside stuff. That was perfect for Harper. As a lake ranger, she liked it that way. This part of the park felt like it belonged to wind, fog, and water first, humans second. On mornings when the sky was clear, the lake looked calm, flat as glass, reflecting the trees climbing steeply from the shore. Fish rippled the surface now and then. A lone canoe might wake the water with a quiet trail. But the fog mornings, that's when the lake turned alien. Mist rolled in thick sheets, hugging the water, smearing the shoreline, devouring the horizon. Those were the mornings Harper felt small, weightless, unsure if water ended and sky began. She first noticed the prince on a fog-drenched morning in late July. She'd pushed off the patrol dock before sunrise, motor whining under her boots. Cold air made her breath hang in faint ghosts. The engine thrummed, the familiar rhythm steady beneath her, guiding her along the usual loop, hugging the shoreline to check for road camps, fires, or stranded paddlers. Visibility was shit. Her world shrank to 50 feet around the boat, a gray bubble of water and darker smudges of land. By the time she reached a narrow western cove, the sun had risen enough to tint the fog gold. Harper killed the engine and let the boat drift, listening to gentle slaps against the hull. The cove was shallow, debris sometimes washing up here. She scanned the sand and saw them immediately. A line of barefoot prints, sharp, adult-sized, starting at the water's edge and moving inland. Human. Each step pressed clean into wet sand. Not like the messy, overlapping chaos of kids racing in and out of the shallows. These were precise, measured, almost dainty. Harper frowned, edging the boat closer until the bow kissed the beach. She stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the soggy sand, crouching over the first print. Every detail made her stomach tighten. Toes, heel, arch, clear and rounded. No shoes. "Hello?" she called, voice cutting through the fog. "Park ranger! Anyone here?" Silence. The forest pressed in behind the beach, dark and tangled. No tents, no clothes hanging on lines. No voices answered. Harper followed the trail. It ran straight, every step identical, steady. No stumbling, no dragging. Calm, measured, like the maker was moving with intention, unhurried. As she walked farther from the water, the sand dried slightly. Impressions got shallower, but stayed crisp. Then, 20 feet inland, the prints stopped. Just ended. No rock, no log, no sudden change in terrain. One step, and nothing. Harper's mind raced. Maybe the person had stepped onto firmer ground. Maybe doubled back. Maybe jumped to the side. She searched. Nothing. Sand around the last print untouched. Light crust over damp. No scuffed grass. Goosebumps pricked her neck. She stepped back, snapped photos. Documentation first, theory later. Back in the boat, she logged it. Single set of barefoot tracks emerging from water, stopping mid-beach, no exit pattern. No campers, weather calm, low fog. Later, she mentioned it to her supervisor. He nodded, brow furrowed, then shrugged. Probably someone messing around. People love mystery footprints. Fog makes it tricky to see. Maybe they doubled back. Harper nodded. Fit into the world of rules, reports, and schedules. That night, lying in the park cabin, listening to wind whisper through pines, her mind kept circling that last perfect print. 2 weeks later, same thing, eastern shore this time. A bay with a soft curve of sand. Sky hard blue, water glittering. She'd checked a campsite nearby, then turned toward the main lake. From a distance, a pale line of sand caught her eye. Stomach knotted. The prints were unmistakable. Bare feet, same size, same spacing, coming straight from the water. She followed them with reluctant curiosity. No prank, no misplaced swimmer. The prints moved up the beach, stopping 15 feet from the shore. No camps, no kayaks. Nearest overnight site half a mile away. Fishermen and heavy waders scattered gear nearby. Harper measured stride distances, matched the first set almost exactly. Photos snapped. Logged. 2 incidents now. Direction pointed somewhere she didn't want to go. At weekly briefing, other rangers joked. Lake ghosts, invisible swimmers. Supervisors suggested maybe an eccentric local, timing their early swims to confuse patrols. Harper didn't laugh. The idea of someone knowing patrol patterns well enough to leave these in multiple spots, unseen, was worse than any prank. Third time, she almost ignored it. Dense, low fog settled over southern shore in mid-August, thicker than all summer. Her patrol narrowed to boat, ring of mist, ghostly outlines of trees. She'd just radioed her position. Standard check-in. Nothing unusual. Sliding past a narrow spit of land, through a fog gap, she saw it. The pale curve of sand, the familiar line of depressions. She wanted to throttle past, pretend not to see. Duty and curiosity won. She eased the boat in, knees in fog. Prints were fresh. Water still dragged in faint traces. Harper crouched to touch one. Cold, smooth, not yet dried by weak light. "Hello," she called louder than before. "Restricted patrol area. Make yourself known." Fog swallowed her voice. It returned muffled, echo-like, as if far inland. Her radio hissed, then silence. Counting steps, she followed the line. 7, 8, 9, 10. Stopped mid-stride. Single print ahead of last pair. Nothing. Slow circle scan. Shoreline smooth. Lake vanished into white a few feet out. Trees just smudges. For the first time, Harper thought maybe the boundary she assumed between lake and shore wasn't real. Maybe there were hidden rules here, patterns she couldn't read. Paths that didn't follow sand, water, weight. Her radio crackled. Supervisor. "Harper, status check. Signal weak. You good?" She held the handset, eyes on empty sand. "South shore. Found more prints." Pause. "Copy. We'll pull GPS tracks, check area. Maybe weird erosion." She didn't say, "Erosion doesn't leave toe impressions." Just agreed, snapped photos, climbed back into the boat. Later, she spread photos across the kitchen table. 3 sets, 3 coves. Stark similarity. Foot shape, stride, emergence from water, abrupt inland stop. Consistency too precise. Hoax? Elaborate. Patrol timed? Perfectly executed. Impulse. Search internal historical reports. One report buried under a decade of routine entries caught her. Lake Ranger, 15 years ago, logged unusual human-like tracks appearing from water at Western Cove, ending abruptly. No campers. Note made her skin crawl. Possibly related to 196's drowning incident in same area. Recommend monitoring. She dug deeper. Old yellowed files told the story. Solo paddler, mid-20s, strong swimmer. Vanished in sudden storm. Kayak washed ashore near First Cove. Body never recovered. Months later, 2 separate rangers logged barefoot tracks. Then silence. Lakes take people. Currents and cold can hide them. Tracks wash away. Staff turnover. Stories fade. Weeks passed. Harper still patrolled, scanned for fires, watched camps. But she kept boat farther from shore, landed quickly, eyes flicking between sand and water, half expecting new prints to form. Late in the season, first autumn chill in air, she returned to original Western Cove at dawn. Fog thin, gauzy, shore clear. Relief hit. Engine cut. Quiet for a moment. Then the first impression formed. Sand dimpled near water, toes pressing in one by one, smooth, deliberate. Footprint after footprint, moving inland to familiar arbitrary stop. Air cold, fog pressed closer, radio silent. She reversed, backing boat, hands gripping sides, watching until prints shrank, vanished. Later, trying to describe it, words felt hollow, like explaining a nightmare. She logged it anyway. Rangers write things down, even the unexplainable. Years later, new hires asked which parts of Chesapeake were tricky. She talked wind shifts, underwater shelves, life jackets. Then, almost casually, if you see a single line of barefoot prints coming from water, stopping halfway to trees, do not go searching. She never explained why. Didn't mention old drownings or previous rangers' notes. Some things she'd learned. The lake doesn't want explained, only witnessed, remembered. The next few weeks, Harper tried to keep her routine tight, hands steady on the wheel, eyes sharp, mind locked on patrol. She still moved past those coves, checked camps, scanned the shoreline, but she stayed off the waterline. Feet that shouldn't exist, appearing out of nowhere, had a way of sticking in your head. Every ripple on the lake, every wave whispering against the hull, set her nerves on edge. One overcast morning in late September, the fog rolled in early, thick and slow. Harper hugged the southern shore, the mist curling around the boat like smoke. She could barely see 20 feet ahead. The lake had shrunk to a gray void, the tree line mere shadows. Her radio crackled, faint static breaking the silence. "Harper, status check." Her supervisor's voice came through, weak and fuzzy. She answered quickly, voice clipped. "All normal. South Cove, no issues." No sooner had she spoken than the water ahead pulsed subtly, as if something had just slipped beneath the surface. Harper froze, heart thumped. She leaned over the bow, straining for a shape. Nothing. Only gray water and fog. But then she noticed it. The line. Bare footprints, faint, emerging like ghosts from the rippling water. Toes pressing, heel pressing, a full human shape forming step by step. Harper swallowed. Not a hallucination. Not imagination. They moved with precision, up the beach toward the trees. She gritted her teeth and stayed in the boat, hands clenching the sides. No voice. No sound beyond her own breathing and the lapping water. Each footprint appeared with eerie deliberation, like someone was carving a path through reality itself. The prints ended where they always had, mid-beach, sand untouched beyond that point. She backed the boat slowly, keeping eyes locked on the line, refusing to turn her back. Goosebumps prickled every inch of her arms. Fog pressed closer, the world narrowed to the beach and the ghostly footprints. Radio silent. Even the crows she sometimes heard along the trees stayed still. After a long moment, Harper forced herself to pull away, throttle smooth, eyes never leaving the shoreline until the prints shrank, then disappeared into white mist. She drifted silently for a while, letting the engine idle, listening to the lake reclaim its usual quiet. She finally turned back toward the patrol dock, stomach tight, hands sore from gripping the boat's edges. Back at her cabin that night, Harper spread the photos across the table again. 3 previous sets, 3 coves, and now the 4th. She couldn't escape the pattern. Each footprint identical. Same size, same spacing, same emergence from water. Abrupt stop inland. No signs of anyone present, no tracks leading away. A perfectly rehearsed enigma. She tried to shake it off. Lakes do strange things. Fog shifts, sand shifts. People mess with patrols. But something in her gut said no. Not this time. Not ever. She dug back through the internal database, scrolling old reports. Track logs from years ago, Western Cove, the same pattern. Solo paddlers, strong swimmers, gone without a trace. Notes ended the same way. Footprints emerging from water, stopping mid-shore. No camper, no trace. A dozen rangers had observed it over decades, each time logged clinically, each time dismissed quietly. She remembered the drowning incident from 15 years ago. Young man, kayak overturned, stormed out fast, never found. Could this thing be him? Or something else using the same path? The thought made her skin crawl. Some presence had learned the shoreline, the patrols, the timing. It moved like it belonged there, but at the same time, it didn't. By October, Harper's patrols were tense exercises in focus. She avoided lingering anywhere near the shallow coves. She never let the boat sit idle by the waterline. Eyes darted constantly. Every ripple, every movement in the fog made her flinch. She documented everything: photos, GPS tracks, notes. But even as she did, she could feel the lake itself pressing against her senses. Watching. Waiting. Late one season morning, she returned to the original Western Cove at dawn. Light fog lingered, thin and gauzy. She slowed the boat, heart hammering, staring at the empty sand. Relief washed over her. No prints. She cut the engine, letting the boat drift. Quiet. Peaceful. Too peaceful. Then, near the waterline, the sand shifted. Tiny dimples pressed by invisible weight. Heel, arch, toes. One footprint, then another, forming a perfect bare line. Harper froze. Her chest tightened. She didn't call out, didn't step out. She sat, body tense, hands clenching the hull, watching each print press into the sand as though a phantom was walking just for her. Step by step, they moved inland, stopping where all others had stopped. The air chilled instantly. Fog pressed closer, encircling her. No radio interference, no crackle, just the silent formation of footprints. Then nothing. Harper exhaled slowly, muscles taut, eyes never leaving the path until it shrank into white mist. She reversed, careful, keeping the lake and prints in sight until the distance swallowed them. That night, she tried to write the experience down. Words felt shallow, powerless against what she'd witnessed. Still, she logged it. Rangers log everything, even what doesn't make sense. Years later, new hires asked Harper for advice. She warned about sudden wind shifts, shallow shelves, life jackets. Then, almost casually, one last piece. If you ever see a single line of barefoot prints emerge from the lake and stop halfway to the trees, do not follow them. Do not investigate. She never explained why. Didn't mention the old drowning, the decades of patrols, the mysterious tracks that learned the lake as if it were alive. Some things, Harper realized, weren't meant to be solved. Only seen. Only remembered. Shoshone Lake had its secrets. Footprints that appeared from nowhere. Lines carved into sand with no weight pressing them. Ghosts of the water, or something older. Something patient. All the park wanted was witnesses. And Harper had become one. She left the cabin's lights dim that night. Fog pressing against the windows. Somewhere across the lake, unseen, the surface rippled gently, as if acknowledging her presence. The prints would form again. They always did. And she would be there, watching, logging, remembering. The lake didn't care. The park didn't care. Only the water and the unseen walker counted. Harper had learned to respect both. Alex always joked the old patrol cabin on the east side of Yellowstone had been around longer than he had. He'd been a ranger for 12 years. The cabin? Near 80. It squatted at the end of a skinny trail, a mile and a half off the beaten path. Close enough to bail you out if the weather turned, but far enough that most hikers never stumbled onto it. To anyone else, it was just another creaky old log shack hiding in the trees. To Alex, it was a checkpoint, a place to top off the rain barrel, scribble in the logbook, and make sure nobody had busted in. When he'd first laid eyes on it during rookie season, it felt safe. 4 rough-hewn logs stacked tall, a tin roof that rattled in the wind, 1 tiny window, a thick door with a stubborn metal hasp. Inside there was a bunk, a table, a shelf stocked with emergency gear, bandages, purification tablets, a battered stove, and a first aid manual so old it could have been fossilized. A spiral notebook sat on the table with a pen. Each ranger passed through, jotting the date, time, and whatever little weirdness they'd noticed. Over the years, the cabin became a fixed dot in his mental map of the park. Snow bent trees, fires carved the hills, rivers shifted banks, but the cabin stayed put. Storms hit faster than the weather reports said, and he'd duck in, shaking rain from his jacket, listening to the tin roof drum. Took him almost 10 years to notice the first weird thing. It was subtle, easy to shrug off. One windy June afternoon, he dragged himself back from a long loop, hitting 3 remote campsites and a trail junction. The sky was that heavy gray that spelled thunder by nightfall. As he crested the rise and spotted the cabin, he froze. The door was ajar. Rangers always locked that door. It wasn't a free-for-all shelter. Unauthorized use meant missing supplies. Could be vandalism. Maybe worse. He crept closer, one hand on his radio, the other near the bear spray clipped to his hip. "Park Ranger," he called from a few yards out. "If anyone's in there, make yourself known." Silence. No shuffle of boots, no startled voices. Just the wind tickling branches and the tin roof whining in the heat. He nudged the door open, half expecting a hiker passed out on the bunk or some couple trying a romantic night in an old ranger cabin. Nothing. Clean. The bunk straight, stove on the table, shelves stocked. Only odd thing, the logbook was open. He stepped in, checked corners, and leaned over the notebook. Last entry? His own, 4 days old. No new handwriting. Nobody had been here, and yet the door had shifted. The notebook nudged. He told himself it was the wind, a mouse, fatigue playing tricks. Closed the door, checked the lock, scribbled the current date, and left. 2 weeks later, he came back. Door locked, hasp engaged. He swung it open and knew instantly someone had been inside. The bunk blanket had a body-shaped dip. The pillow bore a faint stain where a head had rested. On the table sat a food wrapper from a brand the park never stocked. Alex pulled his phone to snap a photo. Another unauthorized visit. He'd write it up. The logbook told a different story. Someone had written a date 2 nights prior. No name, no badge, just a line. Rain all night. Good to be inside. No signature, no initials. Not the standard ranger shorthand. It was deliberate, a copy of procedure without committing. He checked in with the office. Nobody was assigned there. Supervisor told him to watch it, but not to lose sleep. For a while he did. Weekly visits showed a strange rhythm, sometimes untouched, sometimes small signs. A chair slightly moved, a mug shifted, faint smoke smell without ash. Each time the logbook had new sparse entries. 2 days here, Quiet. No one came. Safe here. Alex photographed every page. Handwriting changed subtly, like the writer adjusted grip or pace. Odd phrasing remained. No month beyond day and number. No acknowledgement of breaking rules. Someone was deliberately slipping into ranger spaces, mimicking protocol, weaving in unnoticed. By late August, he decided to wait it out. Scheduled his patrol to hit the cabin late afternoon and stay overnight. Unofficially, sure, but justified by distance. Cleared it with his supervisor, who shrugged. Enjoy the free lodging, they'd said. He arrived as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline. Cabin looked like always, small, dark, swallowed by trees. Door locked, hasp tight. He let himself in and froze. The blanket was folded with surgical precision, corners sharp, military neat. On the table, the logbook and a spoon. One metal spoon, shiny, dented at the edge, someone's bite mark. He turned it over. Scratched into the handle, a word. Stay. Goosebumps crawled his arms. He ran through the motions, checked bunk, stove, shelves, everything else normal. The logbook showed one last entry. Same tight script. That morning. Rain coming. Back soon. He stared, unease turning to anger. Someone was using his cabin. Clever enough never to be caught, bold enough to leave notes. He signed the log himself, jotted an investigation note, and prepared for the night. Table pushed against the wall, he sat on the bunk, door in clear view. Lantern off to save fuel, eyes adjusting to dim. Outside, sky turned black. Rain drummed steadily. Old wood, damp wool, and metallic tang from the spoon filled the cabin. Eyes heavy, he fought sleep. After midnight, a sound. Footstep on the porch. Light. Careful. Another, then a third. Wrong for animals, too soft for a bear. Not skittering like small creatures. Someone was moving quietly, but old boards betrayed them. Alex froze. Crack of light under the door from distant lightning. Latch rattled. Whoever it was had no reason to expect it locked. They'd grown used to slipping in and out. Another knock. Polite. Civil. "This is a park ranger station," he called, calm. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then, "You are early." The words made his stomach knot. Not "I am early." You are early. "This cabin isn't public. Step away from the door." Pause. Rain only. Then, lower, closer. "No one comes here at night. Except you." He moved hand to radio, fingers tightening. Storm might interfere. The voice whispered again, almost intimate. "You sleep 3 hours, sometimes 4. You talk in your sleep." No window by the bunk, only front pane, always curtained. Nobody had watched. Lantern clicked on. Warm glow. Spoon gleamed. "Stay," etched deep. Porch creaked as weight shifted. Latch rattled once, then silence. Footsteps retreated. Alex stayed upright, boots on, listening until storm faded. At dawn, he opened the door, rain dripping. No prints. Only one clue. A second spoon at the bottom step, dented, scratched with new lines. He bagged both spoons and left, filing a report. Law enforcement shrugged. Cabin stayed in use. Rangers quietly avoided overnight stays. They didn't explain why. A month later, the truth, or at least part of it, started bleeding through. A family never came back from a multi-day backpacking trip. Their car sat abandoned at the trailhead, untouched. Rangers, including Alex, got the call and plunged into the woods, combing every creek, ridge, and unmarked shortcut. On day 2, they found the mother and one kid alive, dehydrated, slumped near a drainage far off their intended path. The father and older son were still missing. During interviews, the mother mentioned a man. Quiet. Calm. He had appeared out of nowhere on their second night, offering guidance, showing them a shortcut to a scenic ridge, pointing out an old cabin where they could hole up if weather hit. His words were clipped, precise, like he was reading from a script. "He knew the ranger schedule," she whispered. "He knew when people would be near, and when they wouldn't. He said the cabin was safe," she added. "No one comes there at night, except him." She couldn't describe his face. Every time she tried, the memory slipped like smoke. What stuck were impressions. The glint of metal as he stirred something in a pot, the soft clink of spoons, the way he watched them even while appearing to look down. Search teams found the missing men 3 days later, fallen into a ravine off the unmarked shortcut. Injuries suggested a misstep, maybe a fall, maybe something else. No one could say for sure. Near the bodies, they found evidence of a temporary camp. Buried beneath a thin layer of dirt, a tarp, some canned goods, a stash of cash, and a metal cup. Half covered in the soil was a third spoon, dented, heavy, scratched deep enough to warp the metal. 2 words pressed into it: "You stay." After that, the cabin finally got flagged for closure. Official reasons? Structural hazards, outdated facilities, and resource allocation. Unofficially, nobody wanted a man who knew patrol schedules and thrived in the shadows to have a ready-made hideout. The next summer, they tore it down. Alex watched as logs came down, tin roof peeled off, the bunk dismantled. Everything moved out by mule and truck. Workers thought they'd taken every piece. Weeks later, Alex drifted past the empty clearing, habit drawing him in. Porch gone. Rain barrel gone. Only a flattened rectangle of earth remained. Something caught his eye. Half buried in grass at the clearing's edge, glinted metal. He knelt. Another spoon. Same dent, same weight, same etched message. But this one had no letters. Just repeated lines, etched over and over, bending the metal into a shallow arc. He turned it, letting the dim sun catch the pattern. For a heartbeat, the scratches seemed like letters straining to form words, then failing. Alex left it there, a monument to the cabin's secrets. In his log that day, he wrote only, "Cabin site clear. No structures remaining." He didn't note the spoon, didn't write about the dread coiling in his gut. Whatever had haunted the cabin, the unseen intruder who mimicked rangers, studied their habits, and slipped past locks, wasn't dependent on walls or roofs. Patterns and routines were harder to destroy than timber. Even after the cabin vanished, Alex never forgot the nights listening to rain hammering tin, footsteps creeping across the porch, and the voice that knew his sleep schedule. He remembered the tight, careful handwriting in the logbook, the metallic glint of the spoons, the sense that someone, or something, was always watching, always just out of reach. Rangers adapted. They rerouted. They avoided the old cabin site, but the unease lingered. The spoons, the log entries, the whispered words through walls, and the calculated absence of the intruder. They left marks deeper than fear. They were a warning. Some things in Yellowstone didn't care about rules, patrols, or humans at all. Years later, Alex would drive past the clearing, slowing his truck out of muscle memory. Nothing there but flattened earth and grass. Yet sometimes, in the corner of his eye, he'd swear a metal glint winked at him from where the cabin once stood. He never touched it, never moved it, just kept driving, leaving the memory to linger in the shadows. The park kept its official story. The cabin was gone, removed for safety and upkeep. Nothing sinister, just another abandoned structure fading into the forest. Rangers followed protocol, tourists trekked the trails, and life went on. But Alex knew better. He had seen the proof in tight script on yellowed pages, the precise folds of blankets, the dented spoons etched with warnings, the subtle rearrangement of objects. He'd felt the presence in the silence of the storm, the way footsteps could sound human, but move like a phantom, and the way the cabin itself seemed alive, bending reality just enough to remind him that rules didn't always apply. Structures could be torn down, walls could rot or be dismantled, but habits, shadows, and patterns, those were harder to erase. The intruder's imprint lingered in the echoes of footsteps, the scratches in metal, and the unease that crawled along a ranger's spine when they thought no one was watching. Alex never claimed to understand it, and he never tried. Some things were just meant to be witnessed, remembered, and avoided. The spoons, the notes, the footprints in sand, and the ghostly traces left behind. They were proof that someone, somewhere, could slip through the cracks, blending patience, cunning, and cold observation. He kept a personal rule: never go back, never chase, never confront. Just record, note, and let the park remain a stage for things that humans weren't meant to comprehend fully. And sometimes, late at night, he would imagine the cabin still standing, doors closed, but doors never really closed. Someone flipping through logbooks, leaving cryptic marks, always watching, always practicing the perfect quiet intrusion. It was the kind of story rangers shared in whispers, never in reports, never on tours, just in corners of the mind, a cautionary echo of what lurked in the park's backcountry. Not in reports, not in press releases, not in sanctioned logs, just memory, silence, and the occasional glint of metal in the grass. And Alex knew, deep down, that the spoons and their messages weren't just warnings. They were a signature, a reminder that some things don't follow rules, and some things don't leave. Even when the cabin was gone, the presence remained. Tess had always pictured being a backcountry ranger like a retreat from the chaos of the world. Endless trails through raw, untouched wilderness. Nights alone in cabins, the wind rattling through pines like whispers. A kind of quiet that let your own thoughts echo back at you, unchallenged. She finished forestry school in May 2017, sent applications everywhere she could, and when Yellowstone offered her a seasonal post patrolling remote campsites in Thorfair, she signed on before she'd even finished the first sentence of the offer. Her parents freaked. Friends grilled her about months in the middle of nowhere. Tess told them she needed it. After 4 years of crowded dorms and constant noise, she craved space, silence, and the chance to test her own nerve. Thorfair was nothing if not isolated. Trails stretched for days, only reachable by long treks or horseback. The hikers who made it that far were serious. Bear spray in hand, food properly hung, maps memorized. Tess's job was simple on paper. Check permits, make sure campers respected leave no trace rules, and report problems to the district office via satellite phone. Her ranger cabin was tiny, a log box with a wood stove, a bunk, and enough supplies to last 2 weeks without resupply. She fell in love instantly. The first week passed without incident. Hikes along the patrol routes, polite nods to a handful of campers, evenings at the lantern, journaling. Isolation felt liberating, not scary. On day 8, she stumbled across a solo camper at a site near the southern edge of her district. He was under a knot of lodgepole pines, his tent faded green, practically disappearing into the forest floor. A small campfire flickered in the ring. He sat on a stump, hands folded, staring into the flames with a face that seemed rehearsed. Tess approached, polite but professional. She asked to see his permit and made small talk about the weather. His answers came clipped, precise, lines memorized but oddly lifeless. "David," he said. 3 days in, planning 2 more, then out. Everything checked out. Permits matched dates, campsite booked. She reminded him to secure food at night, wished him well, and started down the trail. "You patrol this section every 3 days," he said suddenly. Tess stopped. Flat, calm, almost friendly. "How do you know that?" He tilted his head like her question puzzled him. "I pay attention. Safety." It should have sounded normal. Hikers often tracked ranger schedules. But something in the flat tone, the unblinking eyes, made her stomach tighten. She nodded, muttered something about safety, and kept moving. A glance over her shoulder revealed him still on that stump, unblinking, unmoving. 3 days later, she returned to the site. Expected it to be empty. David's permit was only for 5 nights. But there he was. Same tent, same stump, same green canvas, same clothes. Fire smoldering low. The unease hit sharper this time. She approached, colder now. "Did you extend your permit?" she asked. "No," he said. "I like it here. Decided to stay." She explained the rules, the violation, the need to leave or call the office. He nodded slowly, absorbing it like new information. Yet he didn't move. Hands folded, fire crackling. Tess logged it, reported via satellite. Supervisor told her to check in 2 days. If he stayed, someone would escort him off. That night, lying on the bunk, wood stove ticking down, she couldn't shake the image of him. Perfectly still, eyes reflecting the fire like glass. 2 days later she returned. Same scene. Tent still there, fire alive, David on the stump. This time, he spoke first. "Tess," he said. She froze. She had never told him her name. Not aloud, anyway. Only on her uniform, stitched above the pocket, hard to see at a distance. She'd been careful, avoiding introductions after the first encounter. "You need to leave," she said, voice hard. "Final warning. Tomorrow you'll be cited and removed." He tilted his head, that mechanical motion again. "I know when you come. I know your trails. I know your cabin. You live alone. You check in every 3 days unless there's an emergency. No one would notice if you missed a check-in for a while." The forest went silent. No birds, no wind. Just the low hiss of fire and the thundering of her own pulse. Tess backed away slowly, keeping him in view, and didn't stop until she reached her cabin, locked the door, and grabbed the satellite phone. Next morning, 2 armed rangers joined her. They hiked to the site. Tent gone, fire ring cold, no signs of recent use. But pressed into the dirt where the tent had been was something that made her stomach flip. A hand-drawn map, precise, showing her cabin, patrol routes, typical departure and return times. Notes in cramped handwriting about her gear, how she walked, her habits. At the bottom, a list of names with check marks. Her name at the end, unmarked. They searched for hours. No footprints led away. No snapped branches indicated a path. David had vanished as if he'd never existed. The district called law enforcement. No records, no permits, no matches anywhere nearby. Tess finished her season, but asked for a front-country transfer the following year. Told everyone it was for more human contact, that the backcountry was too lonely. She didn't tell them about the nightmares. Didn't tell them she checked over her shoulder constantly. Refused to camp alone ever again. Years later, in Montana, she saw a missing person flyer. A young woman, solo backpacking in Glacier. A witness saw her talking to a man at a campsite the day before she vanished. Calm, scripted, unnerving. The witness remembered the man knowing her name, even though she hadn't introduced herself. Tess stared at the flyer, hands trembling. Thought of the map in the dirt, names and checkmarks. Thought of how many remote campsites existed, how easy it would be for someone to slip between them, watching, learning, waiting for the perfect moment. She never returned to Thorfair. When asked for solo backpacking advice, she gave the same counsel every time. Trust instincts. If someone feels wrong, they probably are. And if a camper knows things they shouldn't, don't hang around to find out why. Walk away. Never look back. Some people stay calm only because they've already decided what comes next. The flyer haunted Tess long after she folded it into her backpack. She couldn't shake the way David, or whoever he really was, had slipped in and out of the wilderness, reading her like a book. She still felt it in the quiet, in the dark spaces between the wind and the pines. Back in her cabin, nights were no longer quiet. She double-checked every latch, every window, every way someone could sneak in. The shadows seemed thicker, heavier, crawling across the walls with the pulse of the stove's dying embers. Every creak of a branch, every whisper of wind, made her flinch. She replayed the campsite encounters over and over. His stillness, that flat, rehearsed voice. The way he had known her name without her speaking it. The way he knew her schedule. Each memory gnawed at her, leaving her hollowed out, restless. Tess avoided the southern edge of Thorfair for the rest of the season. She rerouted patrols, stayed in more populated areas, and refused to camp alone. But no matter how far she went, she carried the unease with her, tucked under her skin like a second heartbeat. Months later, she got a call from a colleague stationed in Glacier. "You remember that flyer you saw?" he asked. His voice was low, tense. "Someone reported a hiker disappearing near that park. Solo trip. Witness says the woman was talking to a guy. Calm, scripted, unnerving. Sound familiar?" Her stomach dropped. Every hair on her arm stood on end. She wanted to hang up, wanted to erase the memory, but couldn't. She remembered the map, the check marks, the precise knowledge of her routines. She remembered the firelight glinting off that spoon, the mechanical tilt of his head, the forest going utterly silent. That's when the patterns clicked. The notebooks, the logbooks, the invisible eyes. David, or this presence, was meticulous. He didn't just appear, he studied, memorized, waited. And he moved between campsites, watching, learning, ready for the perfect moment. Tess stopped taking shortcuts on her patrols. She refused the solitude she once craved. Her cabin became a fortress, supplies hidden, doors bolted, paths walked in circuits designed to throw anyone shadowing her off her rhythm. Sleep was fragmented. She dreamed of him sitting on the stump, firelight glinting off his eyes, voice low and precise. "I know when you come. I know your cabin. You live alone." Backcountry tours she used to love became a gauntlet of paranoia. Even fellow rangers made her nervous. She glanced at every face twice, searched every shadow, always imagining the mechanical tilt of his head, the cold assessment behind a calm voice. Her transfer to front country work helped, but only marginally. People around her were real, noisy, unpredictable, but the wilderness called in whispers. Every night, when the lights went out and the dorms settled into quiet hums, she could still hear it. The echo of measured steps, the faint clink of metal against metal. Years later, the memory hit her at a ranger station in Montana. She saw a missing person flyer. Another solo hiker vanished in Glacier. Smiling photograph. Witness talking to a man at a campsite the day before, unnervingly calm, scripted. They had reported that he somehow knew the woman's name, even though she never introduced herself. Tess's hands shook as she stared at the flyer. She traced the map in her mind, traced the list of names with check marks she'd seen pressed into the dirt at that campsite. One glance and she could see it all. The trails, the cabins, the invisible network of observation. How many campers had he learned from? How many patterns had he memorized? How long could someone like him slip through the forests unnoticed, cataloging names, habits, schedules, routines until the moment came to strike? Her stomach twisted. She realized it wasn't just David. It was a presence, an intelligence that waited, calculated, and moved between parks like a shadow in the trees. One person alone could never account for it. It was methodical, practiced, something that thrived on silence, on isolation, on the untested trust of those who wandered too far. She didn't return to Thorfair. The backcountry that once called to her with freedom now screamed with caution. When people asked about solo hiking, she repeated the same mantra. Trust instincts. If someone feels off, they probably are. And if a camper knows things they shouldn't, don't test it. Leave immediately. Don't look back. Some people, she learned, aren't calm because they're kind. They're calm because they've already decided the next move, long before anyone else knows it's happening. Even years later, Tess carried the fear with her. Every creak in a cabin, every soft footstep on a trail, every glint of metal in the firelight reminded her. She slept with the door locked, flashlight in reach, keys and radio beside her. She never camped alone again. The memory of the spoons, the precise scratches, haunted her. Even when she told herself they were just metal bent by a person with too much time and too much knowledge, she knew better. They were warnings, messages, marks left behind by someone who watched, who waited, who cataloged every detail. The scratches weren't just symbols. They were evidence of a presence that moved unseen, patient, careful, watching her even when she thought she was alone. Tess learned to carry that caution like armor. She memorized routines in reverse, changed trails, avoided predictable patterns. Sleep was a gamble. Every shadow became a potential observer. Even in the company of other rangers, her eyes flicked to every corner, every gap in the trees, every place someone could hide. And in her heart, she knew that wherever David, or his kind, moved next, they would be ready, watching, waiting, and they would already know her name. The wilderness was never quiet. Not really. And Tess understood, finally, that the most dangerous things didn't announce themselves. They didn't knock or speak first. They waited for the right moment to make you notice, and by then, it was already too late. Logan had always counted himself a straight shooter when it came to the wilderness. Facts over fear. That meant a degree in wildlife biology, 3 tracking certifications, and a wall of field guides stacked like a fortress in his cabin. Visitors with wide eyes and shaky voices telling him about creatures in the woods? He'd nod, ask a few pointed questions, then calmly explain what they'd actually seen. 9 times out of 10, it was just a bear rearing up or an elk slipping through shadows. The 10th time? Usually too much caffeine, too little sleep, and overactive imaginations. That ratio suited him. It kept the world in order, predictable, safe. Yellowstone had real killers enough. Bison could crush you, grizzlies could tear you apart, and a wrong step into a hot spring meant instant death. No need for made-up monsters. Logan preached respect for real animals, not feeding anyone's paranoia. That mindset held until his 8th summer, the Northern Range. Reports started trickling in near the edge of Lamar Valley. The first came mid-June. A family, packing up a trailhead campsite, wide-eyed and shaken, swore something had circled their tents all night. They insisted it was bear-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too deliberate, with eyes reflecting a color that no forest animal should have. The movements weren't aimless. It was studying them, measuring them. Logan jotted down the notes, asked the usual questions, filed it as a probable black bear, nerves and shadows making mountains out of molehills. Black bears could act bold. Their eyes sometimes glowed weird under a flashlight. People weren't great at judging size or motion in the dark. A week later, another call. 2 backpackers in their 40s, hardened by decades of solo trail life, reported something heavy pacing alongside them at dusk. Almost a mile. Branches breaking high. Wrong height for any 4-legged animal. Stop. It stops. Flash your light, and it disappears with a smoothness that was too intentional. Logan hiked the ridge next day with Julia, a wildlife tech. Plenty of elk tracks, some fresh grizzly scat, a few snapped branches that could have been anything. Wind, moose, God knows. No definitive tracks, no fur samples, nothing odd. People see what they expect, Julia shrugged. Especially if the story's in their heads before they hit the dirt. Logan agreed, filed it as likely a big bear, no aggression, advised food storage and noise-making. By week 3 of June, he had 6 reports from the same patch of woods. Almost, but not quite, bears. Every report had tiny differences, walking on 2 legs, limbs too long, mimicked calls that were wrong. Logan's confidence wavered. He requested permission to set up camera traps along the frequently mentioned trails. Approved. He and Julia spent 2 days installing 8 motion-activated cameras on trees and posts, aimed at open clearings and game paths. A week later, they retrieved the memory cards. Most footage? Exactly what Logan expected. Elk grazing, mule deer trotting, a coyote crossing at dawn. 1 black bear rummaging near a log, completely ordinary. He exhaled, feeling vindicated as he scrolled frame by frame. Then camera 6. Timestamp, 2:47 a.m. A narrow clearing lit by infrared. At first, empty. Then, from the left, something entered. He froze the video. The figure was huge, the size of a grizzly, but wrong. Shoulders too high, limbs stretching in ways that didn't fit any bear he knew. It moved loping, half upright, head swiveling like it was reading the clearing. He slowed the clip. Eyes glowed weird green under the infrared. Fur, if you could call it that, was uneven, scraggly. It stopped center frame, turning toward the camera, sensing it. For 3 seconds it held that pose. Not the casual stance of a bear checking surroundings. Calculated. Deliberate. Like a person realizing they were being watched. Then dropped to all 4s and vanished. Logan hit replay 5 times. Sent it to Julia without a word. 10 minutes later, her voice trembled. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," he admitted. They combed through the other cameras. Only one more caught a hint. A distant shape moving through the tree line, too fast, too far to parse. Same height, same gait. Logan submitted the footage to wildlife management with careful wording. Unidentified large animal, northern range. Requesting mammal specialist consult. 2 days later, the call came. Specialist on the line. 30 years in the field. "I can't tell you what that is," she said, "but it's not a bear, moose, elk, or any North American primate. Limbs don't match. My best guess? Maybe a weird angle on a known animal, but—" She trailed off. "It doesn't move like anything I've ever seen." Her advice? Keep the cameras rolling. Send anything clearer immediately. Over the next fortnight, 3 more clips. Brief, blurred, maddening. Same wrong proportions, same odd gait. Same sense that it knew how to keep itself unseen. Visitor reports kept coming, now mentioning sounds. Low, resonant, starting like bull elk bugles, ending in growls. One hiker captured audio. Logan listened with headphones, stomach knotting as the calls slid seamlessly from one species' signature into another. "It's mimicking," Julia said. "Some birds do," she noted. Logan shook his head. "Not mammals. Not like this." Testing. Early July, Logan and seasonal ranger Marcus hit a private ranch near the park. 2 calves killed overnight. Wounds clean, deep, precise, almost surgical. Partially moved, dragged short distance, then left. Whatever did it had lost interest. Tracks around the site were a mess, trampled by humans and dogs. But at the edge, pressed into mud near a creek, Logan found one clear print. Huge, longer than a grizzly, narrow, claws stretching farther than any bear he'd logged. Toes spaced weird, pad elongated. He measured, photographed, plastered. Back at the office, nothing matched. "Could be deformed," Marcus said. "Birth defect? Injury?" Logan nodded but didn't believe it. Deformities didn't move with that precision, didn't stalk campsites with calculated patience. That night, Logan lay awake, rewinding every encounter in his mind, reports, footage, tracks, sounds. Together, they painted a creature in the gap between known and unknown. Not bear, not human. Not myth, because myths don't leave plaster casts and infrared video. A week later, Logan was leading a wildlife tracking workshop for a group of rangers and interns. They trudged into the patch of woods with the most sightings, moving slow, pausing to inspect scat and tree rubbings. The sun hung low, heat clinging, the forest alive with buzzing insects and birds chirping. But as they crested a low ridge, something felt off. Silence. Total, choking silence. Conversations dropped. Everyone froze, scanning the dense pines around them. No wind rattled branches. Birds had vanished. Even the insect's hum died. Logan lowered his voice, calm but tense. "Predator nearby. Probably a bear. Stay tight. Make noise if I tell you." They crept forward, hands brushing canisters of bear spray at their hips. 50 yards ahead, the trail dipped into a narrow saddle, flanked by thick rock and heavier trees. Marcus, slightly ahead, halted and raised a hand. "There," he whispered, pointing left. Through breaks in the shadows, maybe 60 feet off the trail, something loomed. Towering. Shoulders scraping 7 feet. The shape was wrong. Wrong chest width, limbs too long, head angled like it didn't belong. It stared. Logan felt that cold weight of attention, like the gut-sick fear prey animals feel when a predator zeroes in. Mouth dry. Not a breath, not a twitch. 10 seconds passed. Then, silent, it shifted deeper into the woods. Not running, not scared, just leaving. The forest stayed frozen another 30 seconds. Then, click. Birds returned, insects hummed, wind stirred the canopy like nothing had happened. "What was that?" one intern whispered, voice barely audible. Logan didn't answer. He didn't have one. They finished the workshop early, moving like ghosts back to the office. Nobody spoke much. He filed a report, careful, detailed, including statements from all 6 on the ridge. At the staff meeting, the sighting was logged, discussed, and quietly buried. Officially? Misidentified wildlife. Black bears, grizzlies, maybe a hybrid acting weird from food stress or territorial tension. The park's public information officer drafted a statement reassuring visitors that all critters in Yellowstone were documented, monitored, understood. Logan didn't argue. He kept the cameras rolling, continued patrols. When rookies asked about the northern range, he gave the standard safety rundown. Bear spray, noise, food secured. But quietly, he added one last thing. If you're up there at dusk and the forest goes dead silent, and you see something moving just inside the tree line that doesn't look right, don't identify it. Don't get close. Turn around. Walk back the way you came. Don't stop till you're out. Most rookies assumed he meant grizzlies. He let them. The alternative, that Yellowstone harbored something that straddled the line between known and unknown, something that watched, mimicked, studied the humans thinking they were doing the observing, wasn't a fact he wanted to prove. Some mysteries belonged in field notes, seen, documented, not named. Logan's night stayed restless. He replayed the footage, the tracks, the sounds. Each encounter carved its own deep, jagged scar in his mind. That figure in the infrared glare, those strange, precise prints, the low, shifting growls that started like elk and ended in something else. Even during patrols, he noticed it. Shadows lingering too long at the edge of his vision, movements that didn't fit any animal's profile. Campers occasionally reported glimpses, tall, strange, deliberate. Always gone when investigators arrived. And every time, a nagging certainty crawled up his spine. It was studying them, learning routines, watching habits, waiting. Some nights he thought he heard it moving outside his cabin, just past the tree line, pausing, listening. He never investigated, never looked. He didn't need proof. The forest had already shown him everything. Rookies came and went, unaware of the deeper warning hidden in his words. Most believed in the bears. Some doubted him when he hesitated to elaborate, but he didn't care. The lesson was survival, not curiosity. Approach the unknown, and it might approach back. With patience, with calculation, and with no mercy. Yellowstone was full of real danger. Logan had always known that. But the truth of what haunted the northern range? That danger didn't roar or charge. It waited. It watched. It learned. And it moved just out of sight, slipping through the spaces between what humans knew and what humans feared. Some nights, Logan still woke to the memory of those eyes glowing in infrared, staring at the camera, unblinking. Some nights, he imagined them in the darkness outside his cabin, waiting, calculating, patient. Not animal, not human, not myth. Something else. Something neither named nor fully understood, because some things, he knew, were better left unspoken. Documented but unproven. Glimpsed but never confronted. And so he continued his work. Cameras running, patrols logged, notes detailed. To the untrained eye, Yellowstone was peaceful, the wilderness safe, predictable. But Logan knew the truth. He had seen the shape in the trees, heard the call shift mid-vocalization, held the plaster cast in his hands. He'd watched it slip between known and unknown, mocking the law of nature itself. He didn't chase it. He didn't try to name it. He warned, quietly, to anyone who would listen. Respect the forest. Respect the known threats, and if the unknown watches you, run. And never look back. Because some monsters don't have names. Some monsters just wait. Harper had been running interpretive programs in Yellowstone for 5 years when she first caught wind of the full Singing Gorge story. She figured she'd heard all the park legends by then. Tales of tourists swallowed by hot springs, the ranger who vanished in a blizzard and showed up 3 weeks later with no memory, ghost stories around campfires, half history, half fantasy, meant to make the wilderness feel alive and dangerous. But the gorge story came slow, whispered over a fading evening at the employee lodge by an older seasonal ranger named Tom. The overlook itself wasn't famous. It clung to the park's western edge, reached by a trail that wound through dense forest before spilling out onto jagged rocks. The ground fell sharply into a tight canyon, maybe 80 feet deep. Pines clawed at the walls, scraggly and stubborn. A thin creek snaked along the bottom, mostly hidden, murmuring quietly. The acoustics were weird. Voices carried strangely, bouncing off the stone, stretching echoes into ghostly shapes. One side could hear the other, as if the canyon itself was whispering back. Tom told Harper that locals steered clear at dusk. The old tale came from ranchers and trappers long before the park existed. It said that when the wind funneled just right, you could hear singing. Not wind, not birds, not coyotes. Singing in a language that didn't exist anywhere but there, rising and falling like a lullaby. "Who's supposed to be singing?" Harper asked, a small smile on her face, expecting a punchline. Tom didn't smile. "Depends who you ask. Some say a trapper fell down there in the 1800s. Others? Older. Native groups avoided the spot entirely, called it thin, a place where the boundary between here and somewhere else was weaker than it should be." Harper tucked the story away. Folklore. File it under stories meant to spook campers. She didn't think more of it, until the park asked her to set up a new evening program. They wanted something atmospheric, a mix of nature, culture, and story. The gorge seemed perfect, dramatic, easy enough for families, acoustics that promised intrigue. By late June, she was running groups twice a week. 15 to 20 people at a time gathered on the stone shelf, sun sliding behind the ridge, light turning gold and soft. Harper talked geology, carving over millennia, ice, water, erosion. She showed them how a whisper on one side could appear clear on the other. And then, always, she told the legend of the singing. She kept it light, clear, folklore, not fact. Explained echoes, wind, illusion. Still, the visitors leaned in, wide-eyed, glancing at the canyon as if they might see something rise from it. For a month, nothing unusual. They listened, asked questions, snapped photos, and hiked back down before darkness swallowed the trail. Program was solid, smooth, exactly what the park wanted. Then, in late July, a woman hung back. Everyone else had started down the trail. Quiet. The visitor approached Harper. "I heard it," she said softly. Harper frowned. "Heard what?" "The singing," the woman said, low. "While you were talking. Not a recording, not speakers. It came from down there." She gestured toward the gorge. Her hands gripped themselves tight, knuckles white. Harper felt the first tickle of unease but kept her voice calm. "The wind out here plays tricks," she said. "Sometimes it carries sounds from other trails." The woman nodded, but didn't look convinced. Maybe, but it sounded like words, not English. And it stopped when your story ended, like it was listening. Harper thanked her, watched her leave. Alone on the stone shelf, she leaned close to the edge, ears straining. Wind feathered the gorge. Creek murmured. Some distant elk bugled. Nothing else. She told herself it was the woman's imagination. Expectation is powerful. People hear what they want. 2 weeks later, it happened again. A man, maybe in his 60s, lingered as the group dispersed. He asked, straight, firm, why a vocal recording in a program meant to teach natural acoustics? He said he'd heard singing, soft but clear, coming from the gorge. It sounded old, mournful, like a lullaby sung by someone who had forgotten the words. Harper checked her notes. No new audio, no tricks. Probably echoes, she said, or another group down the trail. He nodded, skeptical. His doubt was written across his face like ink. That night, Harper returned alone. Said she was scouting, checking trail markers, safety. The truth? She had to hear it herself. Sunset was bleeding into the horizon. The gorge already dark, a shadow swallowing stone and creek. She crossed her arms against the chill, listening. Long minutes passed. Nothing but wind, water, rustling pines. Then, as the last light fell, she heard it. Faint. Deep in the gorge. A melody, slow and careful, structured, wordless. Not wind, not echo. A voice. Thin, aged, singing a broken lullaby. Harper's chest tightened, heart kicked up. She stepped back from the edge. Hands shaking, she pulled out her phone, hit record. The singing continued, steady, indifferent to her presence. 2 minutes, rising, falling, deliberate. Then it faded, gradually, like footsteps walking away. She played it back. Her breath, jacket rustle, wind, all there. And beneath it, unmistakable, the melody. And another layer, faint, almost misted. Her own voice, speaking words she hadn't said while recording, words she had spoken an hour ago during the program. The boundary wasn't solid. The gorge had taken her voice, twisted it, returned it. Harper froze, phone trembling, darkness wrapping the shelf. The gorge felt alive, listening. Harper didn't linger. She stepped back from the cliff, each footfall deliberate, trying not to let the gorge know she was leaving. Heart hammering, mind racing, she tucked the phone into her jacket and kept her eyes forward. She didn't glance back. The canyon hummed silently, like it was holding its breath, waiting. The following week, she quietly shifted her evening program to a meadow overlook. Wide open, flat. No cliffs, no narrow chasms, no acoustics that could turn sound into something alive. She told her supervisor it was about accessibility, safety concerns. He didn't press. Harper never reported the real reason. There was no way to explain it without sounding crazy. But she kept the recording. Locked it in a folder on her laptop, headphones ready, volume high. She listened again in her quarters, alone. Twice. The first time, the repeated section of her own voice sounded like a playback. Mechanical. Hollow. The second time, the same lines shifted subtly, the tone slightly off, as if someone was imitating her. The third time, it sounded desperate, begging. Her own voice whispering for help. She deleted it immediately, feeling a chill run up her spine that lingered long after the headphones came off. When new rangers asked about good sites for evening programs, She gave a list. Careful. She never mentioned the gorge. If someone stumbled upon it and asked, she warned them, "The acoustics are unpredictable. Sound travels weird. It's hard to manage a group safely." True, but not the full truth. Some places remembered voices. Some places kept them. The gorge was one of those places. Over the decades, it had collected whispers, laughs, stories, complaints, secrets. It stored them in stone and wind, twisting them, reshaping them, returning them to the living when conditions were right. And if it had your voice, it practiced, it learned, it copied, perfected. Until one day, it sounded like you, but not quite. Harper tried not to think about it. She buried herself in programs, led groups in broad meadows and open glades. She kept moving. The canyon stayed behind, out of sight, out of mind. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind shifted across the park, she could swear she heard faint echoes, voices not her own, and maybe a fragment of hers, returning from somewhere she had never been. By the next season, Harper had transferred to a park in the desert. Wide open spaces, the kind of terrain where sound traveled straight and predictable. Flat, safe. She never told anyone why she left Yellowstone, never mentioned the gorge. But the memory stayed. In the dry heat, under the endless sky, she'd sometimes pause, listen. When a trail whispered with the voices of distant hikers, carried by the wind across the sand, her pulse would spike. Because every so often, a phrase, a word, a laugh, just faint enough to make her skin crawl, sounded exactly like her. And Harper knew. It was still listening. It had learned her voice. Somewhere, deep in that narrow gorge back in Yellowstone, stone and wind were practicing, shaping, rehearsing, waiting for the right night to speak again. Not as wind, not as creak, not as echo, but as her. She clenched her jaw, pulled the brim of her hat down low. The desert was safe. The voices were distant, but every now and then, the memory of the gorge crept in, and she could feel it grinning in the shadows of rock and pine, patient, deliberate, alive. Some places weren't just landscapes. Some places weren't empty. And the thinner the boundary, the more they wanted to be heard. Mason had been running backcountry permits at Yellowstone for 7 straight seasons before he even noticed the weird pattern. Mostly, his job was office-bound, sitting behind a desk more than trekking through the wild. Hikers came in, filled out forms, dropped their fees, and left with their permits for the park's scattered backcountry sites. Each spot had a code, a max occupancy, and strict check-in and check-out rules. The system was simple, neat, built on trust, and it worked. Usually. Most hikers followed the rules. Some didn't. That was par for the course. What wasn't normal? Site 17. Site 17 sat tucked in a narrow valley on the park's eastern edge. Getting there meant a 10-mile grind through thick forest and 2 creek crossings that only flowed part of the year. The trail was steep and scrappy. The campsite? Tiny. No killer views, no hidden waterfall, nothing that screamed, "must see." Most hikers skipped it. Still, every season, a couple of parties ended up there, usually experienced solo backpackers chasing isolation. The problem? None of them ever officially checked out. The park trusted that once a permit expired, the hikers were gone. Overdue permits kicked off searches, alarms sounded. But Site 17? It was a ghost in the system. Permits issued, hikers vanished. No follow-up. No missing person reports. Nothing. Mason first stumbled on it one slow afternoon, idly digitizing paper logs into the new database. He noticed Site 17 had a suspiciously high number of permits over the past 30 years, none with matching checkouts. He cross-checked names with incident reports, hoping for a boring explanation. Misfiled paperwork, checkouts at the wrong station, something mundane. Nothing. He dug deeper. 4 decades of data, permits stretching back to the late 70s. The pattern didn't break. Dozens of names, dozens of permits, all disappearing into nothing. No incidents, no rescues, just gone. He flagged it to Helen, his supervisor, methodical and sharp-eyed, with 20 years at the park. She leaned over the desk, scrolling her own records. "Huh," she said, quiet. "That's weird. But nobody's filed a missing person report tied to this site. If people vanished, we'd know." Mason tilted his head. "Would we?" Helen didn't answer at first. They both knew the truth. Yellowstone was huge. People slipped through the cracks. Rarely, but it happened. "Run a patrol," she said finally. "Go check it out. See if there's anything physically wrong. Maybe it's just a clerical glitch that's been repeating for decades." Mason agreed. Rational. Practical. The next clear September morning, he hiked in alone with a day pack. Water, a satellite phone, printed notes. The trail wound steeply through lodgepole pines, over exposed roots and rocky stretches. The second creek crossing was low, just a trickle, and he hopped across on stones. Site 17 appeared exactly where the map said it would. A small clearing, fire ring in the center, tent space flat enough to pitch, a bear pole for food. Trees hemmed it in on 3 sides. A faint game trail disappeared into denser woods. Nothing wrong. Nothing threatening. He did a slow sweep around the perimeter. No unstable trees. No rock hazards. The fire ring, old but solid. The bear pole, sturdy. Wildlife sign? Just normal elk droppings, some old coyote scat. Safe. Too safe, almost. Then he spotted it. Half hidden near the tree line, a faded green stuff sack, rotted and tangled in undergrowth. He crouched. Inside, a rusted stove, a busted water filter, a brittle old map. He carefully lifted it. The map had a corner date, 1983. More gear appeared the longer he looked. A snapped tent pole tangled in roots. A single boot too degraded to size. A metal mug, etched name nearly worn smooth. Each item came from a different decade. Left behind naturally, eaten by the forest, not hidden deliberately. Mason sat on a flat rock near the fire ring, sifting through the permit records again. Something wasn't adding up. People abandoned gear, sure, but this much? Over decades? All in one tiny valley? That wasn't normal. On impulse, he followed the faint game trail deeper into the woods. 50 yards in, he froze. A shallow depression, almost invisible, lined with stones. At first glance it looked natural, but crouching, he saw they were deliberately placed. Another, a third, then a fourth, 5. Heart thudding, he backed to the clearing and pulled out the satellite phone. Hands shaking, voice tight. "Helen, send law enforcement, forensics. Something's not right at Site 17. I think people didn't leave. I think they're still there." Investigation followed. Weeks of it. Dogs trained to detect decay, ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists. Human remains, some fresh, some decades old, shallow graves stretching a quarter mile from the site. Not all remains matched missing permits. some unidentifiable, some from cases gone cold because nobody thought to check a legal campsite. Then the horrifying truth began to crystallize. Someone wasn't a visitor. Someone knew the permit system, knew patrol schedules, knew how to arrive when solo hikers were alone, and vanish before anyone passed through. 30 years. Steady, predictable flow of targets, hidden in plain sight. The investigation dragged on for weeks, creeping through the valley like a shadow. Forensic teams combed the area with cadaver dogs, archaeologists prodded the soil, and ground-penetrating radar cut ghostly lines through the earth. Every piece of evidence Mason had stumbled upon was confirmed. Shallow graves, some almost fresh, some decades old, dotted around Site 17. Not every missing permit matched a body. Some remains were too fragmented to identify. Others tied back to cold cases. People who had disappeared without a trace, their names long forgotten in bureaucratic files. The question that gnawed at everyone was simple, terrifying. How had this gone on for so long without anyone noticing? The answer, when it emerged, was almost too clinical in its horror. Site 17 had been hunted by someone who knew the park better than anyone. Someone who understood the permit system, the patrol rotations, the flow of hikers, and how to appear only when their prey arrived. Over 30 years, a single predator had used the system itself to orchestrate a stream of isolated victims. Investigators unearthed a cache buried a mile from the site. Wallets, IDs, journals, cash, all meticulously recorded. The handwriting in the journals didn't match the names on the permits. It belonged to someone keeping detailed logs, arrivals, methods, disposal. Someone who treated murder like paperwork, like tracking permits. They never found this person. Dead? Moved on? Slipped into the shadows? Nobody knew. The latest remains dated back 12 years. The cache hadn't been touched in over a decade. Mason tried to return to normal life, but the images haunted him. Every time a new permit request came across his desk, he could see the pattern. Names vanishing into the void of Site 17, never to emerge. He pictured hikers leaving his office, smiling, wishing them safe travels, unknowingly walking into the same trap. He couldn't stop seeing it. He requested a transfer to a different position in another park, something removed from permit management, something safer. Visitor education. He told colleagues it was a change of pace. The truth, the graves, the meticulous stones, the way the forest swallowed people whole, system failure included, stayed locked behind his eyes. Site 17 was closed officially. Its designation removed from maps. The trail rerouted. Long-term monitoring put in place quietly, no fanfare. Public statements? None. Yellowstone couldn't risk the panic. But backcountry rangers knew. They whispered the tale in dim offices, over campfires, always with the same warning. If a campsite seems perfect, convenient, too safe, be careful. Sometimes, the predators in the wild aren't furry, not claws and teeth. Sometimes, they know the rules better than you do. They exploit trust, exploit the system, and hunt in plain sight. Mason never hiked alone in the backcountry again. Every patrol, every solo assignment, he paired up. Every time a camper crossed his path, he double-checked permit logs, repeated safety checks, lingered just a little longer than necessary. When rookies asked why he insisted on it, why he cross-referenced data obsessively, why he checked in more often than required, he gave the same short answer. The system only works if people follow the rules. They never pressed him. They didn't need to. He didn't have to say which people he meant, the unsuspecting hikers, or the ones still out there, lurking in the pattern, waiting for the next name to appear. Even years later, in his new position, Mason carried the weight of Site 17. The names, the shallow graves, the eerie perfection of those stones. Every forested valley whispered the lesson. Sometimes, safety is just an illusion, and the wild has its own hidden hunters. Riley had been on the Edge Patrol for 3 years before she started piecing together what the bones meant. Boundary work wasn't glamorous. Nobody put it in recruitment pamphlets or filmed it for visitor center reels. While other rangers led hikes or rescued hikers stuck in snow, Riley trudged through the park's outer edges, where federal land met private plots, scanning for trespassers, poachers, and illegal off-road damage. Sometimes she'd run into hunters who strayed over the line by accident. They were apologetic, easy to deal with. Most of the time, though, the signs were intentional. People who knew exactly where the boundary sat and didn't care. The first time Riley spotted the bone arrangements, she figured they were natural. Predators left remnants, scavengers scattered what was left. Deer carcasses ended up leaning against trees, elk bones snagged in underbrush. It was ugly, but normal. These weren't normal. The bones were deliberately placed, propped at tree bases in loose circles, always facing inward. Sun-bleached, weathered white. The first grouping she found had 6 bones, a rib, a femur, a partial jaw. Elk, deer, maybe a bighorn sheep. She snapped photos, logged coordinates, and moved on. Ravens sometimes picked at them. Odd, but not terrifying. A few days later, a second circle showed up a quarter-mile down the boundary, near a dirt road hunters used to reach the forest. Same setup. Bones at tree bases, facing inward, circle about 15 feet across. But this time, she noticed the soil inside the ring looked off. Darker, softer, and smelling faintly chemical. Plastic burned or some industrial residue. Riley crouched and dug her fingers into the earth. Loose, recently turned, mixed with something wrong. Ash? Fuel? Who knows? She bagged samples, GPS marked the spot, and kept moving. Over the next fortnight, she stumbled on 4 more clusters along the same stretch. Always near access roads, always the inward-facing bone circles, always disturbed, chemically tainted soil. She flagged it to her boss, a seasoned lawman named Garrett, 20 years in park enforcement. He frowned at her pictures and soil samples. Poachers sometimes marked territory, he said slowly. But this was on another level. Chemical residue in soil? Concerning. Maybe someone's dumping waste or burying something, Riley offered. Garrett didn't scoff. He escalated it to the park's investigative services and requested a deeper sweep with more hands on deck. 2 weeks later, Riley returned with Garrett and Kowalski, a federal wildlife crimes ranger. They hiked together to the first circle. The bones were still there, though one had shifted, probably an animal. Soil remained dark and turned. Kowalski knelt, sniffed, grimaced. "Not campfire ash," he said. "Chemical. Been here a while." He pulled out a collapsible shovel and began peeling back the dirt. 6 inches down, the blade hit something hard. He froze, brushed dirt aside, and uncovered a corner of thick plastic. Riley's stomach dropped. Garrett edged closer, hand on his radio. Kowalski worked carefully, exposing a tightly bound bundle sealed with duct tape and stained with dark, oily residue. He cut it open slowly. Beneath layers of plastic were bones. Not deer, not elk. Human. What followed was 4 days of excavation. Federal teams, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. They uncovered a string of shallow graves stretching 2 miles along the boundary. Each grave marked by the same bone circles, each one containing human remains at various stages of decay. Some were decades old, some buried within 2 years. DNA and dental records identified a few. Others were too degraded. They were lost to time, forgotten by the world outside the park's edge. Reading the reports, Riley felt her stomach churn. Most of the victims had been reported missing, just not from Yellowstone. Transients, runaways, vulnerable people from neighboring states. No one had been searching hard. Their disappearances barely registered. The pattern was sickeningly clear. Someone had used the park's edge as a disposal corridor for years. Remoteness made it perfect. Patrols were sparse. The bone circles served 2 purposes: warn anyone paying attention and guide the killer back to the graves. Riley worked closely with the investigative team, guiding them through the routes she knew, spotting other potential sites. They found 3 more graves beyond the initial finds. Same inward-facing bones, same disturbed soil. The person behind it? Never caught. A few suspects emerged. A contract worker with access. A long-haul trucker familiar with the area. Nothing concrete. The case went cold, buried in the stack of unsolved crimes where jurisdiction overlapped and resources ran thin. Riley requested a transfer 6 months later. Told Garrett she wanted a spot with more visitor contact, fewer lonely patrols. He nodded. No argument. Before leaving, she walked the boundary one last time. Graves filled in, soil smoothed, bones removed, tagged, catalogued. Only small metal stakes remained, each numbered. She traced the 2-mile stretch, weighed down by the names she had learned. Lives reduced to case files and forensic notes. People gone, marked only by these macabre circles. At the farthest trail point, she looked over the tree line. Endless forest, mountains stretching to the horizon. Beautiful, quiet, indifferent. She thought of the person who did this, how many times she had passed graves without knowing, how the circles had been there all along, waiting for her to understand. A raven croaked from a nearby tree. Its black eye tracked her. She forced herself forward, back to the trailhead, refusing to look over her shoulder, refusing to imagine what still lingered in the spaces between patrols. The park was vast, the boundary long. She knew in her chest like stone, not all graves had been found. Her new post was front country, busy trails, visitor centers, and wildlife talks. Predictable hours, crowds instead of shadows. Questions about bison and geysers, not bone circles and chemically stained soil. It was easier, safer, almost normal. But old habits die slow. Riley never stopped scanning tree lines, never ignored the odd patch of soil that looked wrong. When she spotted bones in weird arrangements, or even traces of disturbed earth, her pulse ticked up, instincts kicking in. She taught new rangers the same rules, over and over. Don't touch, don't move, mark it, call it in. Patterns like inward-facing circles weren't random. Someone had used the wilderness as more than a playground. They had used it as a hunting ground. A few rookies pushed for details. For them, she stepped aside, voice low, serious, eyes on the forest beyond. She told them about the graves, about the victims, about the killer who had worked the edge, knowing patrols, roads, and blind spots. Who had counted on remoteness and overlapping jurisdictions to hide their work. She warned them that the case was technically open, but leads were dead, resources pulled. Whoever had done it might still be out there, using other remote patches, marking graves with bones, trusting that no one would understand the warning. She drilled one final rule into them. Trust your gut. If it feels wrong, it is. If the air smells off, the forest too quiet, the ground too soft or patterned, document it, report it. Don't go back alone. 2 years passed. She transferred to a coastal park. Salt air and ocean horizons replacing mountains and dense forest. The boundaries were obvious. Water on one side, cliffs on the other. Easier to patrol, easier to feel in control. She told herself it was for career growth, a change of scenery, professional reasons. Convincing enough for her lips. Still, on her last day at Yellowstone, truck loaded, paperwork signed, she stole one last glance at the mountains. Relief rolled through her chest. Relief that she wouldn't be alone on those boundary trails anymore. Relief that someone else would stumble across whatever was still out there, lurking in the quiet. Relief she could finally sleep without dreams of bone circles, shallow graves, and the methodical, patient work of someone who understood that the best hiding spots were invisible to even the most careful eyes. She started the engine and drove away. Didn't look back. The park stretched behind her, vast, indifferent, holding its secrets under layers of soil, stone, and sun-bleached bones. Most people would walk past, never seeing a thing. The memory of it didn't fade, though. Every time a new ranger asked about boundary patrols, she gave the same advice, calm but firm. If you find bones in a pattern, especially inward-facing, mark it, call it in, don't touch. She never went into full detail unless they were rookies she trusted. Then she let them in on the grim truth. How the dead had been hidden. How the killer had counted on the wilderness. How some people could turn nature into a trap. Even now, at her new park, she scanned the horizon, listening to the wind, the water, the distant call of birds. She noticed the soil, the trees, the way the land could swallow things whole. The lessons from Yellowstone stuck. Some places weren't just land. They were hiding spots. Playgrounds for predators who understood systems, human behavior, and the patience of the wilderness itself. She kept her eyes open, her instincts sharp. She warned the others. She taught them to trust what they saw, not what they wanted to believe. And she never walked alone on remote stretches without thinking of those who had vanished in the forest's shadow. And the circles of bones that were warnings she'd learned to read too late. Riley's transfer didn't erase the memories. It didn't erase the knowledge that some hunters had no fur, no claws, just patience, systems, and a place where the law's reach didn't extend. The forest, mountains, rivers. Yellowstone kept its secrets. And now, so did she, carrying them quietly, carefully, like a warning in her chest. The ocean horizon before her was open and predictable, but she knew better than to trust that all was safe. Somewhere, in some backcountry stretch, someone was still counting on human blind spots, still marking, still watching, still using the land to hide what should never be hidden. She had survived it. She had learned from it. And she would teach that lesson again, silently, whenever someone wandered too close to what they shouldn't see. The park behind her was silent. The graves were covered, the stakes tagged, the bones gone. Yet she knew, in the spaces between patrols, in the places no one checked twice, there were still stories buried deep, hidden in the forest's quiet, and she would carry that knowledge everywhere she went. No one else needed to know the full truth. Only those who paid attention, only those willing to see the patterns, only those who could survive the dread lurking in the trees would ever understand. Riley drove on, engine low, wind in her hair. The coast stretched ahead, open, flat, and easier to navigate. But in her mind, the forests of Yellowstone never left. Every tree line, every patch of darkened soil, every circle of bleached bones lingered, a shadow she carried with her, a lesson she would never forget, and a warning she would pass on when someone asked the right questions. Ryan's first season at Yellowstone hit him like stepping into a story that had already been written, one where he wasn't the protagonist. The Lamar District Station smelled like wet pine and old paperwork, the radio buzzing low with voices that seemed to remember him before he'd even set foot inside. The first thing everyone wanted to say about his new beat was always about someone else. "You're on the northeast routes," the supervisor said, sliding a map across the desk like a warning. "Same patch that ranger handled before. He knew every inch of it." Other rangers murmured, half joking, half serious. "Big boots to fill," they said. But the unspoken weight hovered in the air. An empty locker, a glance at faded call signs in old logs. Ryan pieced it together slowly. 3 years ago, a ranger had died on this very district. Slipped on wet rock during a storm, fell into a ravine, and bled out before a chopper could reach him. The incident report read like a cautionary tale. Weather fatigue. Pushing past limits to help someone in need. Ryan read it twice in his first week, trying to see it as a lesson, not a warning. Rational, trained, prepared. That was him. Superstition didn't fit into his checklist mindset. Still, when he opened the locker they'd told him to use, the ghost of another nameplate etched into the metal pricked cold at the back of his neck. The first weird thing happened on his third night shift. He was alone in the tiny radio room, logging calls, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the old windows. The other rangers were gone, asleep in their quarters. The radio sat silent until the base unit crackled with life, a calm male voice, faintly muffled by storm interference. "Base, this is 53 on the North Ridge. Visibility dropping. Heading down to check for camper's vehicle." Routine phrasing. Professional tone. Problem was, there was no Unit 53 on duty anymore. That call sign belonged to the ranger who had died in the ravine years ago. Ryan checked the whiteboard listing active units. Only his sign and a lone overnight wildlife tech were marked. No 53. No one on the North Ridge. No missing camper that evening. He keyed the mic, trying to stay steady. "Unit 53, confirm your location and assignment." Static hissed, long and hungry. Then the voice replied, just slightly farther away. "Copy, base. Approaching creek crossing now. Will advise if I see tire tracks." Hair on his arms stood straight. Ryan flipped through the logbook, looking for training notes, tape loops, anything that might explain a pre-recorded call. Nothing. 53. Repeat last 10. Who authorized that patrol? Silence. Static, then gone. The storm picked up. Wind slammed against the station, making the old building groan. Ryan logged the incident as possible interference, telling himself that was all it was. Morning came. He asked around casually. Nobody ran a drill. Nobody else heard it. When he mentioned the call sign, Chloe, a veteran ranger, snapped her head up. "You heard him on the radio?" "I think so. Could be interference, but he used his number and said he was checking the creek." Chloe exhaled, slow, like she'd been holding her breath. "Don't joke about that. Ever since the accident, storms trigger glitches. People heard his voice giving route updates from places no one was assigned. It was supposed to fade. Maybe it hasn't. No recordings, only live." Ryan told himself there were technical explanations, old wiring, weird atmospheric conditions, radio frequencies bouncing off the ridges. He repeated them like a mantra as he clipped the handheld to his vest, call sign list heavy in his mind. For a while, nothing. Trails memorized, landmarks cataloged, tourists helped. On clear days, the valley stretched open, wind moving freely. On foggy nights, shadows pooled beneath trees in ways that made his heart tick faster. Inexperience and imagination, he told himself. Then the dreams began. Mundane, painfully normal dreams. Hiking trails he didn't recognize but knew intimately. Stepping over exact rocks, touching specific trees, glancing toward distant ridges at the exact moment. Muscle memory, but not his own. First night, an off-trail shortcut between switchbacks, a hidden vantage above a stream. Never hiked it awake. Second night, he traced the route on a map, every landmark real. He mentioned the dreams to Chloe on a quiet ride to a briefing. She didn't blink, didn't interrupt, fingers drumming the wheel unevenly. "Do you ever feel like you're remembering things that didn't happen to you?" he asked. Her jaw clenched. "Yes," she said after a long pause. Learned not to say it out loud. People start talking about stress leave, evaluations. "So, what do you call it?" She kept her eyes on the road. Sometimes places remember people. Trails, ridges, valleys. They remember the ones who walked them enough, and if you step into their routines, the place helps you. Or it doesn't let go. Ryan didn't like the sound of that last part. The real test came late September. First big storm. A family never returned from a day hike. Car at the trailhead. Sky clear that morning, ugly by afternoon. Low clouds dragging rain across ridges, lightning flickering. Radio crackled with updates. Ryan and Chloe were assigned the upper trail, near the ravine where the previous ranger had died. Irony hung like wet clothes, but coverage demanded it. "Stay on marked path," the supervisor said, eyes lingering. "No shortcuts, no heroics. If visibility drops, pull back. We are not losing anyone else up there." The rain turned to sleet, wind-driven mist slicing across their faces. Trail blurred, mud building around boots. Trees loomed like dark pillars. The forest dropped into heavy, unnatural quiet. The radio hissed. A familiar voice. "Base 53 at the switchback above the ravine. Trail slick. Advise against sending units to creek. Visibility poor." Ryan froze. Blood drained. Chloe stiffened. "You heard that too?" he whispered. She nodded once. "Keep moving. Don't answer him." At the next switchback, just above the ravine, lightning split the sky. Ryan thought he glimpsed a figure in a rain jacket moving along the old trail, exactly where they weren't supposed to go. Gone by the next thunderclap. They took the ridge spur as ordered, spotting a flash of color. The lost family, half buried in snow and brush, alive but shaken. The storm still raged. His radio crackled once with garbled syllables. Voice or storm, he couldn't tell. Later, debriefing done, family safe, Ryan sat alone in the dim radio room. Incident log. No Unit 53. No recording. He reopened the old file about the Ranger's fall. In the margins, handwriting that looked like Chloe's. Trail remembers. Radio remembers. We should too. Storm nights, foggy mornings, fleeting voices giving route updates from places no one was assigned. Old trail names, downed trees, vanished cabins. Ryan stopped rationalizing. He treated it as guidance, unwelcome but precise, like footprints in snow left by someone who vanished before him. When the radio warned of slick bends or staying high when weather turned, he listened. Quietly, over the air, he never acknowledged it. Neither did Chloe. Together, on patrols near the ravine or creek, they went slower, double-checked footing, followed protocol, and the ghost of someone else's steps. On the last day of the season, Ryan stood at the overlook, valley opening below. Radio low. Wind tugged his jacket. Clouds drifted pale across the sky. He keyed the mic one last time. Unit on Northeast Patrol clear. Trails intact. No incidents. Static whispered, a familiar tone layered over his own. A heartbeat. Then silence. The valley held its story, folding it into the land, waiting for the next ranger to step into it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine and unease. Ryan kept his headset clipped, eyes scanning ridges and gullies, as if expecting the air itself to whisper secrets. The voice on the radio never returned, at least not in full clarity, but shadows of it lingered in his mind. Sometimes a faint static hiss would shape itself into a phrase, just enough to make him glance toward a ravine or a ridge, tense and alert. He learned every contour of the northeast routes. Switchbacks, creek crossings, fallen logs, places the previous ranger had walked, places Ryan now knew as though memory had been implanted in his bones. Dreams still came, almost nightly. Mundane, precise, terrifyingly ordinary scenes of trails he hadn't hiked but somehow recognized. He stepped over rocks, touched trees, checked vantage points. Each movement in the dream was muscle memory he didn't own. Waking up left him dizzy, questioning what was real and what had been whispered into him by the forest itself. By mid-October, the first serious snow of the season hit. Low clouds smothered the valley, rain turned to sleet, and the wind ripped through pines like paper. A report came in. A lone hiker hadn't returned from a day trip. Car abandoned at a trailhead. Ryan and Chloe were dispatched to retrace the upper ridges, near the old ravine, the very same spot where the other ranger had met his end. "Stick to the marked trail," the supervisor said again, his voice tight, eyes locking on them. "No heroics. Pull back if visibility drops. Do not become the story." The forest was unforgiving. Mud-caked boots, icy sheets of rain cut across their faces. Trees disappeared into a gray ceiling. Silence pressed in, the kind that made even trained rangers' hearts thump. Then the radio hissed, that voice again. "Unit 53, same calm, distant tone. Switchback above ravine, trail slick. Advise against descent to creek. Visibility poor." Ryan's stomach dropped. Chloe stiffened beside him, eyes narrowing. "You heard that too?" He nodded, throat tight. "Exactly like before." "Ignore it. Keep moving," she said. Her voice was calm, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. They approached the last vantage point before the slope dropped into the ravine. Wind tore sideways, rain lashing like needles. Below, the valley was a smear of gray and white. Ryan thought he saw movement, a figure in a rain jacket, careful, deliberate, moving where they weren't supposed to go. Then gone. Lightning flickered, illuminating nothing but mist. They followed the supervisor's instructions, taking the ridge spur east and circling back toward the lower trail. The missing hiker was found, shivering and soaked, taking shelter under a fallen tree, disoriented but alive. Relief hit Ryan in waves, but it mingled with an unshakable sense of dread. The forest seemed to watch, to remember. Later, in the dim radio room, Ryan checked the logbook. No 53. No recordings. He pulled the old incident report again. In the margin, scrawled in handwriting that looked like Chloe's, "Trail remembers. Radio remembers. We should too." And he believed it. The glitches continued on storm nights. Foggy mornings brought fleeting voices over the radio, giving route updates from places unassigned. They referenced landmarks that no longer existed, cabins dismantled, trees cleared years ago. The voice became a guide, a warning, a ghostly shadow of the ranger who had walked these trails before him. Ryan never acknowledged it over the air. Chloe never did either. Together, they followed it silently, slowing their pace, checking each other's footing, respecting the memory in the land. Patrols became a quiet dance between protocol and intuition, following not only the trail, but the ghost of someone else's steps. Days shortened, snow thickened, and Ryan's awareness sharpened. The valley that once felt open now pressed on him, every shadow a possibility. Yet the forest's memory was precise. Every warning it whispered kept him and Chloe alive. They discovered subtle cues, broken branches indicating a hidden trail, scraped bark marking a safe step around ice, depressions in the snow where rocks lurked. They followed these hints silently, never speaking, never confronting the ghost, only learning to survive alongside it. By late November, the season's end neared. Ryan stood alone at the high overlook where the valley stretched wide, forest and rock rolling into distant mountains. Clouds moved lazily, wind tugging at his jacket. The radio sat low on his shoulder, static crackling faintly. He keyed the mic one last time. Unit on Northeast Patrol clear, trails intact, no incidents to report. For a heartbeat, a second voice layered over his own. Calm, familiar, almost repeating his words. Then silence. Ryan exhaled, letting the wind carry it away. He had stepped fully into the story, learned its rhythm, followed its invisible hands. The valley held its tale, folding it into trees and stone, waiting patiently for the next ranger to walk its memory. As he packed his gear and walked toward the station for the last time, he noticed details he hadn't before. The faint trails in snow where previous hikers had vanished, subtle depressions in earth where footsteps had disappeared. The forest remembered everything. He felt a chill, not of cold, but of understanding. Chloe had already left for the lodge. Ryan lingered for a moment, feeling the weight of the seasons he had stepped into. The land had marked him, whispered warnings he could not erase, lessons he had learned in static and shadow. Every storm, every fog, every silent step on slick rock had taught him to read the forest like a map, to respect its memory, and to understand that some stories never end. They only wait. And as he drove away from Yellowstone for the first time, leaving the mountains behind, he felt relief, yes, but also a pulse of something darker. The forest stretched on, indifferent, enormous, full of secrets. Somewhere, buried in its folds, the ghosts of rangers past and the faint echoes of those who had vanished lingered. Waiting, watching, remembering. Ryan didn't look back. The valley, the trails, the unseen voice, they would remain, folded into the landscape, a story that had already been written, waiting for the next set of boots to walk into its memory.